Hey everyone, it's Rin. My team just won the official Unite March Championship Series tournament, so I thought it'd be a cool idea for me to make a competitive tier list. You guys can have my opinions on what I think the meta looks like post the Duraludon nerf. Technically, Azumarill does come out in a few days, so what I'll be doing is I'll be putting my thoughts on Azumarill and where I think it belongs in the tier list down in the comments below, so you can just check the pinned comment there if you guys want to know what Azumarill looks like, and well, enjoy the video. I think the tiers themselves with the names or the way that they're named currently are pretty self-explanatory. So characters that end up in S tier are going to be characters that essentially like shape how we play the game and like force us to run them almost just because they're that strong and have that much of an impact. Strong picks are going to be picks that you can pick with like most things that are just like overall good characters, but not necessarily like ones that like force you to play certain playstyles or whatever. Mediocre picks are picks that can work out, but I don't think are the best. Nearly worthless are picks that are either extremely niche or just really don't have too much merit, but they're not god awful. And then won't even consider is for characters that are just like complete trash and not even on my radar. So we're gonna start off with Venusaur. So both builds of Venusaur, Petal Dance and Solar Beam, are decent. The problem with Venusaur now is many of the junglers screw him over. He has less survivability now that Hoopa is in the meta because he doesn't have an Eldegoss to help like pocket him, give him like stuff or whatever, and Trick's not as good on him, IMO. Most of his healing came not from his damage, but from the fact that Giga Drain just has little like heal numbers on it. Because Venusaur itself doesn't do like that much damage to get that much use from Trick. So I don't think it's that good. Solar Beam is decent. You have like similar things with Spirit Shackle, Decidueye. The difference being that his early game is much better than Decidueye's, but I think he actually loses to Decidueye. All right, so we'll put Venusaur in B tier. Next up is Gengar. Gengar, I put in D tier. His early game is god awful. His impact in late game team fights is not enough. It's pretty much impossible to actually win a coordinated team fight against teams with buddy barriers and whatnot, because you don't have the damage to go through buddy barriers, but before the buddy barriers on the enemy team wear off, your ult team will die. You also have like one of the least impactful ults in the game. So you have a garbage ult, you have garbage early game, you don't have enough damage to go through buddy barrier despite being an assassin, you don't have longevity, you have to go in despite not having survivability, and once you go in, you can't get out. Also, auto-targeting screws over the Hex build, so you can't run that, so you have to run Shadow Ball G-Meter, which is a single-target burst build, which it isn't even good at doing that. Next up is Mime. I think Mime fell off pretty hard as well. I'm probably going to put him in C tier, actually. I don't think Mime is good at all right now. I feel like his level 4 power spike is the only thing that's good for him. His ult is okay. It has a low cooldown, but most teams seem to be funneling Pikachu farm in order to get her ult over and over again, or Talonflame, so you can't really like spam Mime ults by funneling it farm. You can just full heal, ignore it, and kill the rest of his team. He doesn't really provide too much survivability, and I haven't seen any team be able to make guard swap work. Next up is Snorlax. Obviously, heavy slam plus block set. He is decent secure in lane. The problem is his ult isn't good. You can kind of ignore block and heavy slam. He's kind of annoying. And obviously, if you're playing like score comp or whatever, he can knock you off of goals, but I don't think that's like I don't think that happens often enough for it to even be worth it, nor is it even that good because you can just score again later or just run around the Snorlax the entire game before that even happens. Anyway, I think Snorlax is mediocre. Gardevoir. I think Gardevoir, this is a hard one. So before I rate like the junglers, most of the junglers in this game are countered by other junglers. I think the jungle state, the state of the jungle right now is pretty counterpick meta. So that means a character like Gardevoir can be really strong, against certain picks, but then it can be god-awful against other picks. Like, a Gardevoir against the Greninja is not a very fun day. A Gardevoir against the Charizard is not a very fun day. Gardevoir against the Talon is not a fun day. But a Gardevoir against a Blastoise is probably a pretty fun day. A Gardevoir against, like, a Slowbro is a pretty fun day. Gardevoir against a Blissey is a pretty fun day. Stuff like that. So it's kind of hard for me to rate junglers. I'm going to put Gardevoir in B tier just because she has too many counters that are prominent right now. But I still think she's a really good pick. I think she does pretty well into certain characters in the meta right now. And she's always a good pocket pick. Next up is Absol. I think Absol is decent as well in comp. So to play with Absol, you have to play like a weird, more aggressive, scory kind of comp because you're never winning a Zapdos fight, right? But his early game is absolutely insane. So you can guarantee first Dreadnought, you can guarantee first Rotom, you can hard snowball from that. You crash points, you play back cap, boring stuff with like Hoopa ult to like put you back or whatever. I think it's decent. The issue is with the way a lot of teams play the game right now in 5v5, at least in North America, Absol doesn't really fit into the strategy. So it would be very awkward. You'd have to practice Absol in order to make it decent. And even then, it would only be decent. I don't think it would be amazing. Garchomp. I think Garchomp is pretty bad right now, actually. So in jungle, I don't feel he's good. And then in top lane, I don't feel he's good. He doesn't have any impact at the first dread unless you hit 9. And hitting 9 is generally pretty hard to do unless you're against certain matchups in the jungle. The problem is the strong matchups in the jungle right now are characters you shouldn't hit level 9 against, so it can't be run there. In top lane, Lucario will always be more useful than you. You lose the early game to Lucario, he will pop your focus band and then just walk away. Even though you win like an auto trade, he's just going to hit you with spells, walk away, get last hits, hit 5, E-speed you on Bs. You're very sad. It's pretty much impossible for you to get Dragon Rust before first Beast. So I think Garchomp is pretty not good right now. Next up is the stupid furry. This thing has been god tier since the start of the game. They have some sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. They really love Lucario for some reason, and they refuse to meaningfully nerf him ever. And this character, in the 8 months or so this game has been out, has never been bad. Maybe even 9. I don't know. However long this game's been out. Next up is Crustle. I think Crustle is complete trash. I think there are some foreign teams that ended up running Crustle. I don't know how or in what universe they make it work. It feels like Crustle doesn't have any combat ability, and you can say run around and score, but I feel like there are characters that run around and score, like Greedent, much better than Crustle does. His early game is terrible. His utility in fights is pretty terrible. The only thing is going for them is it's really hard to flip Zapdos against him. Or rather, it's really hard to secure Zapdos because you can't kill him while you're doing Zapdos because of his ult shield. If he stands right on top of Zapdos as well, it's a lot of AoE damage on it. So you can just ult and stand on top of Zapdos, which is really, really broken. But that's like his only gimmick IMO. Next up is Greninja. I think Greninja is too countered by the meta right now. So Greninja's a pretty strong character, but all the junglers that are strong right now are junglers that end up doing very well into Greninja. So he suffers from the same thing as Gardevoir, where his kit is pretty decent, but he can't really be run, I guess. I think Attacker Greninja is actually under-researched, though. I think it's pretty decent. I've been playing it as like a trolley pick, but as I've been playing it as a trolley pick, I think it feels pretty decent when I play it, but I'm not playing against the best of teams, obviously. Talonflame is pretty good right now. He fits into a lot of comps. He does a lot of damage. He knocks a lot of characters like Gardevoir out of the meta. Does a lot of damage. Has very low ult cooldowns, meaning that he can fight very often. He can ult at Dreadnought, go farm up, ult at Rotom, go farm up, ult at Dreadnought, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. He's very good at backcapping, so he can do that. He makes it very hard to secure objectives because you can always just like hide from super far away and then come in and try and snipe it with Brave Bird. Or if you're playing Fly, you can snipe it with that as well. I think the Brave Bird set is better, but both are viable. Talonflame is just a pretty strong pick right now, I think. Charizard is also a strong pick right now, IMO. So obviously we've been a Charizard enthusiast for a while. I think he's been underrated for a while. I think teams are finally starting to see his value. Um, he's not really countered by anything in the meta right now. Honestly, Charizard doesn't really have like a counter, I guess. He's a pretty just solid character. When I play Charizard, I don't feel like any character in the game can really destroy me on my own. I feel like I can outplay most things, especially after the buffs to Flamethrower and Fire Blast. I think Zard is very strong. And no, I don't think Slowbro is a counter. I think you guys don't know what counters are if you think Slowbro is a counter to Zard. Next up is Zera. I tried to make Zera work earlier. So Zera has a few issues going on with him right now. The first issue is once you hit level 5, you're not any stronger than you were at level 4. So jungling with him like that is pretty worthless. Sending him to lane isn't good because he's not going to be useful for strat if you send him to lane. You have to hit level 8 to get discharge, but if you're hitting level 8 and getting discharge, you're probably losing to the enemy junglers before that, so they probably have a level advantage, meaning that when you hit level 8 for discharge, they're probably going to get level 9. This is because Zera's early game is going to be worse than other characters who are actually getting abilities, especially the characters that are meta. Like if I'm playing Zera and I run into a Zard who has Flamethrower, for example, of bees, that's a matchup I'm going to lose. I'm just going to get kited out. I'm going to lose pressure. He outranges me. He does more damage than me. He kites me out, blah, blah, blah. I guess it beats Talon early game, but then once you hit level 7, there's like a lull between the 5 to 7 state until you hit 8. And hitting 8 is going to take a long time and a decent amount of resource allocation. And between that time, Talonflame can do a lot. And even then, if you do hit 8, the Talonflame is probably on its way to hitting 9 because her level 7 is very strong and it's pretty easy to hit 7. If they knocked Zeraora's levels down by 1, maybe it'd be a good pick. Another thing is, even if you hit 9, you have to wait all the way until 10 to be able to ult. Once you hit 10, even then, he doesn't feel that impactful anymore. After the discharge nerfs, after the ult damage nerfs, I think they nerfed his ult damage twice. It's really hard. Cinderace. I don't think Cinderace is that amazing right now. I think he's good. He's not like dominant like he used to be. I think he's definitely a viable jungler. He's definitely playable. He is countered by characters like Talonflame IMO or even Blastoise, but I still think he's strong. He's not like they're not unplayable matchups for him. You can still play into those matchups. He's still pretty good early game. It's weird because he doesn't really have abilities early game, but his range advantage that he has over the other characters and his ability to fight at first bees is pretty strong. So I think Cinderace is pretty good. The only downside to Cinderace is his level 7 through 9 lull. All he has is Blaze Kick and he doesn't have the attack speed buff from it. But once he gets level 9, he's pretty good. Next up is Eldegoss. I think Eldegoss is B tier. It's hard to fit both Eldegoss and Hoopa in a team comp. And I feel like Hoopa is an insanely strong character. I think while Eldegoss isn't bad, you can't really justify running it, I guess. You can't run Hoopa Eldegoss something unless you run Hoopa as like an attacker. And I think running Hoopa as an attacker is wrong because the other attackers are much stronger. She's still a good character. It's just not what she used to be. She's not like god tier like she was before Hoopa came out. Cramorant, you guys know my hatred for Cramorant. I'm not going to talk about this thing. Blastoise, I think, is really strong. I think he's bordering on S tier. Maybe he would be S tier. I don't know. Both of his sets are actually very strong. He's very hard to kill. It reminds me of, if you played this game early when Blastoise first came out, the current Water Spell build reminds me a lot of that. It's weaker at first Dread than it used to be, but he has the ability to assassinate backliners with the Water Spell plus Rapid Spin and just ignore the entire enemy team like he used to before, which is really strong. He's also very difficult to kill in the later stages of the game when he gets the defense buff from Rapid Spin. His ult being giant AoE CC plus big damage is very strong, especially since it can cancel a lot of things in the game. It can cancel Cinder ult, it can cancel Duraludon ult, blah blah blah. Next up is Pikachu. I think Pikachu is pretty strong right now as well. Pikachu's main advantage being her insanely good early game, very good range to help poke out other characters, and then her biggest strength is her super low ults timing. So you can ult at like 250 and farm up your ults back, and that means you can force things like Rotom or whatever and make it crash into the top because the enemy has to be very careful when taking fights against the Pikachu because if the Pikachu ever has ult, she's going to get it back before anything meaningful respawns. Fable's obviously not in the game. These two obviously aren't in the game. I think Ninetales is pretty good. I think the nerfs on her were probably justified, but I also think that the nerfs on Duraludon made her worse because the nerfs on Duraludon made Blissey worse, and Blissey pairs very well with Ninetales. So in a weird way, she kind of got pushed down, where if Duraludon was still in meta, I think Ninetales would probably be higher because Blissey would be higher, and they synergize very well. She still has a very strong kit. She's still a good character. It's kind of weird that they gave her an entire dash, and then they gave her healing on her auto attacks, and that still didn't make her super broken. So it makes me wonder how bad Ninetales was before. Next up is Wiggly. I think Wiggly is A tier. Wiggly has never not been good in this game. This character is a menace to society. Huge Charm is stupid broken. Her early game is stupid broken. Her ult is stupid broken. Her CC is stupid broken. Everything about her is stupid broken. We hate Wiggly. Next up is Bro. I think Bro belongs in B tier. He's a decent pick. I think he's outclassed by other bot lane picks, specifically Blissey and Wiggly right now. I think Bro is also pretty weak to Hoopa being in the game because charging up Water Gun is virtually impossible against Hoopa early game, which makes your secures worse than they used to be because Hoopa can stun them. There's also like a weird lull between like level 6 and level 11 where he only has one thing of Surf, or he only gets a one knockup from Surf where he feels not that strong, and his ult recharges a super long time, which is also pretty bad. He's also pretty immobile for a tank. With that said, he is pretty good as a counter to certain characters, like Lucario, for example. I think he does very strong into Lucario. I think he does pretty good into Talonflame as well. You can ult him the second he Brave Birds in, and then you should be able to delete him before he can ult. And that is if he's using it as initiation. Maybe Bro could justifiably be A tier, but I don't know. I feel like he's not as much of a menace as he was in the early game. Next up is Machamp. I think Machamp is really strong right now, actually. He feels very, 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 very good top lane. I think if Lucario ends up getting nerfed, Machamp will see a lot more play. It's weird because they haven't really buffed anything about him recently, but he still feels very strong. His biggest issue, obviously, is he doesn't have... Actually, I should put him in B tier. All right, so Machamp's biggest issue is that his first Dread is god-awful, and his first Bs should be lost to Lucario. But if you can get comeback EXP somehow after that, assuming things go bad, so like let's say you use an ult on someone, you get some catch-up EXP, I think Machamp comes back in the game and he comes back much stronger than Lucario does in those fights. He can single-handedly, he can like 1v3 backlines late game. He just presses ult, he doesn't even have to use the second part of his ult, he just runs at them and they can't do anything because he just auto-attacks him for 2k and there's no counterplay. Hey, that rhymes. I got bars. I'm gonna put him in top of B tier. Next up is Blissey. I also think Blissey belongs in B tier. So when you saw us pick Blissey in the March Championship tournament, we picked Blissey in part because it was a very good counter to Duraludon at the time, and it had pretty good synergy with Duraludon. So the Helping Hand synergized with it really well. But then Safeguard also removed Duraludon's Dragon Pulse stack, so Duraludon's damage got gutted pretty hard, and it wasn't tied to her ult like it was for Wiggly. So this meant we could take like fights without being forced to ult against the Duraludon, which made us feel much stronger into it. It also gave our Duraludon more mobility to run around. And it also gave our Duraludon on-demand access to be able to ult without popping full heal. That being said, with Duraludon nerfed, and not being like some sort of like god tier monster, I think that Blissey goes down in priority. Next up is Mamoswine. So I personally can't find a use for Mamoswine that I can't find also for Snorlax in a way. You can play more aggressively with Mamo in the early game, but he falls off a cliff so hard. And he's not even like that impactful at Dread, which is weird. He's only super impactful for the first 5 levels. He has one of the worst ults in the game. His scaling is god awful. You can just full heal, run, and ignore him. I don't know. This character, he is stupid strong early game, but then after that, he's just nothing. He feels pretty easy to ignore. I'm going to put him in C tier. Next up is Sylveon. So, one thing I want to note about Sylveon, putting her in C tier, in solo queue, I think Sylveon is A tier because in solo queue, you can actually hit level 4 on Sylveon without repercussions. In comp play, it is extremely difficult for you to hit level 4 with Sylveon in the attacker slot, and if you're running Sylveon jungle, well then that's a lot of EXP you're funneling onto someone with the worthless ult for Dread. So Sylveon itself, or in a vacuum, I think is a pretty strong character. She does a lot of damage. She's very good in fights if you can keep even, but I don't think she should be able to keep even because I don't think you should be able to hit level 3 or level 4 in the early game. You can't run Muscle Band if you're running Hyper Voice, just because it's god awful and you can't auto attack during Hyper Voice. Her auto attack range is stupid low, so if you ever auto attack a Wiggly, she can literally run into you and guaranteed proc you Charm just by walking at you during the animation. Her secure is garbage. All of it can be blocked super easy. It all does super low damage. Swift is a multi-hit thing that does like 150 damage a hit, which is terrible. Baby Doll Eyes does like 300 damage or so and is very low range. They're both pretty slow projectiles. They're both extremely linear. It's just really hard to get out of the early game with Sylveon to actually get going to be a useful character. IMO. If you can get out of the early game, she's pretty decent, but good luck doing that, I guess. Next up is Greedent. So, this one is weird. I don't know how to rate Greedent because Greedent, technically by how I'm making this tier list, should be S tier because Greedent itself enables so many things. But I don't think the playstyle that Greedent enables is the best. I do think it's really strong though. If we look at like regions like EU or Japan or whatever, I guess I'll put it in S tier. But it's a different kind of playstyle. You generally don't run these two, at least in the NA/EU meta. You don't run these two on the same team. They're just different kinds of team comps. This character makes securing Dreadnoughts virtually impossible. This character makes... Nah, I'm going to put it A tier. I think it was better last patch against the Duraludon. I'm going to put it A tier. So, Greedent is technically a meta-defining Mon. I think it was better last patch against the Duraludon, though, and that meta. But it makes flipping extremely difficult, or securing objectives, I should say. Team fighting against this is absolutely insane. It can play score comp. It has very strong early game. It counters a lot of picks, like it counters Decidueye, for example. It counters Gardevoir, for example. It counters Solar Beam. It counters A9. It counters blah, 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 blah. I think it's a very strong pick. I just think it's a different kind of team comp you have to run. Next up is Decidueye. So I think Decidueye goes in B tier as well. So the Decidueye last patch looked a lot better because it was specifically for a counter pick into Duraludon. However, this patch, I think Decidueye is not good into the characters that are meta right now. So the Charizard, the Talon, the Blastoise, I think it does pretty poorly into all of these. It does poorly into Lucario as well, and I think it does poorly into Pikachu. And these are all very popular characters right now. So I think Decidueye lost a lot of prio. He is still pretty good if you can pick him to the right characters. Like if you can pick him against the Gardevoir, he's very strong. I think he can be very strong with the Cinderace as well. But once again, he's more like a counter pick character rather than like a good overall character. If you look at all these characters up here, these are characters that just generally have good matchups across the board. These characters over here are like characters that have like good counter matchups, right? These are characters that you play to beat specific comps, I guess, is a better way of putting it. Dragonite, honestly, I don't know. I need to experiment more with Dragonite. I don't know. If I had to guess, I think Dragonite would be A tier. Serena, I also don't know. Trevenant, you'd have to run him Defender because you can't run him top lane. And I think in Defender, he has garbage secure. I don't think he brings enough to the table. And actually, that's it. He has garbage secure and he doesn't bring anything to the table for when he actually scales up. He doesn't feel that impactful in fights. He doesn't feel impactful early game. He pretty much guarantees that you lose first Dreadnought as a result. I don't know. This character just feels not good. Aegislash. I've tried running Aegislash a few times. I feel like Aegislash does nothing. He's virtually impossible to fight team fights with. If you see him once when he's in sword form, he's dead. His ult is super janky, even though it's a very low cooldown. Sword form, or not sword form, shield form, stalling or whatever doesn't feel that impactful. This character feels like trash. You have to run him either top lane or jungle, which means you're either getting rid of a good pick top lane, like Lucario, or you're getting rid of a good pick jungle, like Blastoise or Talon or Charizard or whatever. So I think this character is trash. Next up is Hoopa. This character is disgusting. Trick enables a lot of characters. The Omnivamp late game is absolutely batshit. Hoopa's ult is very insane, especially for second dread. It makes it so you get to play topside for free as the team that's ahead. And then her early game is also insane. She's very good for securing last hits because she has an on-demand stun. She has a lot of damage in the early game. She steals enemy berries, which is essentially a heal. I think Hoopa is very, 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 very stupid. Probably deserving of another nerf. And then we don't even have to talk about the fact that her ult is on demand AoE instant stun. And then she has a free 2k nuke that's a giant cone that's the size of Texas. Last on the list is Duraludon. So I thought Duraludon got hit pretty hard with the nerfs, but then I ended up playing him today, and I actually feel like Duraludon is still pretty good, but you have to play around him. So the biggest changes with Duraludon post nerfs are his level 5 is not as strong as it used to be. You can't just like perma-dive whoever top. You don't guarantee to win first Bs, but he still has pretty good secure on objectives. He still does a lot of damage, especially inside of his ult. It's very hard to force into him. He just auto attacks for a lot. Even though he doesn't have the range he used to have, even though he doesn't have the damage he used to have, I still think he's a very strong character, but you do have to play around him. They're in I don't know tier.